Awesome, great. Thank you, Katie. And thank you everyone for joining us for our first virtual YP webinar. For everyone who doesn't know, my name is Brad Brogdon. I'm an architect with Gensler. I'm also the chair of the Regional Business Alliance Young Professionals. And we're very excited that you're able to join us for what should really be a great dialogue around the situation that we all find ourselves. And as always, Katie, we want to take the time to acknowledge our wonderful sponsors who help make programming like this possible. So if you want to flip slides. So our Charlotte Alliance Young Professionals Engagement Fund, our platinum sponsor is Bank of America. Our gold sponsor is UNC Charlotte Belk College of Business. Our Diversity and Talent Development Fund platinum sponsors are Truist, Belk, CPI, Compass Group North America, and Sealed Air. And Katie, I think before we kick it to introductions, you were going to make some announcements relative to tech tips in this virtual platform that we're working in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to do a real quick, what I'm calling a tech check, make sure everybody's on the same page. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll find a toolbar, and on that toolbar, you'll see the control to mute and unmute yourself. You can also stop sharing your video there as well. If you move your cursor to the right on that toolbar, you'll see an option to open a chat box as well as the participant list. Within the chat box, you can message individual people by using the drop-down menu in the chat box. And then you can also send a message to everybody. If you click on the participant list, you'll see a list of everybody that's in the meeting. And also within that list, you'll see a button to either raise and lower your hand. We are going to take questions, but we're going to take them at the end. So if you could please hold your questions until the end, enter them in the chat box, and then one of our moderators will read the question out loud. If y'all are having any technical issues, please feel free to message me privately, and I'll be happy to help you work through those. Brad, back to you. Thanks.
And Katie, did we have a poll that we had set up, or is that gonna?
We do have a poll. Give me 1 second to switch gears, and I can launch that.
And while Katie is bringing up the poll, it's worth noting that this meeting is being recorded, just so everyone's aware, so it should be available after the fact.
And in just a moment, I am going to put a link into the chat box. If you copy and paste that link into your browser, you'll be able to access the poll.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. And that poll has a list of questions that we hope everybody in the audience will take the time to answer. Ultimately, they're a little bit for our information, but also it may help us deliberate on some of the questions we asked towards the ends of this conversation. So it looks like Katie has shared that. So everyone, please, I'm going to keep rolling, but take the time to go through that poll and answer some questions. So without any...
Hey, Brad,
yes,
one note, the poll is anonymous.
Thank you, Michelina. Glad that you said that out loud. Perfect. And so we can see that those poll responses are already coming in. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
As we see those responses come in, I think we can go ahead and introduce our panelists, because I want to make sure we leave enough time for the great dialogue that's going to happen. So let's get started on the topic. Crushing COVID-19, making the new normal work for you. And like I said, I have the privilege of introducing our amazing lineup of speakers. So bear with me. When you have amazing speakers, you have impressive bios, and I promise these are the edited down versions. So Ericka Ellis-Stewart is an advocate for public education, the environment, and mental health. Since 2015, she has worked for Mental Health America of Central Carolinas, which is a local nonprofit that promotes mental health through advocacy, education, and prevention. She currently serves as MHA's Director of Education and Advocacy. She's a nationally certified mental health first aid trainer. She's also certified to teach the Talk Saves Lives, SAD No More, and QPR suicide prevention curricula to adult and youth populations. Miss Ellis-Stewart is also a master trainer with the QPR Institute in Spokane, Washington. She served 8 years on the school board and retired from her elected life in 2019. So happy retirement, Ericka. Kenya Hunter is the head of recovery operations for the Vanguard Group. She is an IT executive with nearly 25 years of experience in the industry. Currently, Kenya is the head of, as I said, global technology operations for Vanguard, where she leads the recovery operations services. She is responsible for leading and defining the strategy and vision for recovery operations and IT business continuity, ensuring that the Vanguard enterprise always has the ability to serve its clients without disruption in the case of contingency or disaster scenarios. She's an active member of several CRGs at Vanguard, including Women in Leadership Service and Women in Leadership Service IT. She is the lead for Vanguard's Black Professional Development CRG in North Carolina and is in the process of founding VBPN for technology professionals. Additionally, Kenya is a passionate sponsor, advocate, and coach, and a proud alumni of the University of South Carolina with a bachelor's degree in computer science. Nicole Story is the Neighborhood and Community Partnerships Manager for the City of Charlotte. She has worked for more than 20 years promoting responsible development, sustainable behaviors, civic engagement, and increased quality of life for communities and their residents within the southeastern U.S. Her experiences span public, private, and nonprofit sectors where she has worked as a senior land use planner, advisor, zoning consultant, and community activist. She's currently the Neighborhood and Community Partnerships Manager for the City of Charlotte and Executive Director of Keep Charlotte Beautiful, which is an affiliate of Keep America Beautiful. In this role, she facilitates neighborhood happiness through the administration of resource programs which educate, build capacity, develop resources, and promote the successes of neighborhood volunteers and community leaders within the city. Last but not least, Vanessa von Mathews is the founder and chief resilience officer at Asfalis Advisors. Vanessa's breadth of experience in risk mitigation, crisis preparedness, business continuity, and terrorism mitigation equip Asfalis to support their customers. Prior to that role, she worked with a Tier 1 intelligence agency and Fortune 50 company, which equipped her to be on the front lines of the industry to restore business and community resiliency. She was very recently recognized by the Mecklenburg Times as one of the 50 most influential women in Charlotte. The U.S. State Department recognized, and the United Kingdom's Acquisition International magazine named her as a finalist for the best female-owned and operated small business. Additionally, Vanessa was the first female in the state of Georgia to graduate with a degree in Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Whew. Got through it. Wonderful panelists and excellent bios. And so I think we can roll right into things. So Ericka, I think we'll start with you, and if you'll just wave so we know who's talking, it should pop up. But Ericka, what are some of the effective techniques that young professionals can utilize to maintain mental wellness during this period of social isolation where routines have changed and we're dealing with job uncertainty?
I think one of the things that we need to do is to make sure that we're checking in each day, and by checking in with yourself to figure out, how am I feeling today? How am I feeling in this moment? And so I use 6 questions each day. I call them the daily quarantine questions. And they are, what am I grateful for today? Plugging into gratitude is incredibly important to our overall emotional well-being. Who am I connecting with? Because even though we are physical distancing, I call it physical distancing, not social distancing, to remind us to stay connected. So who am I calling? Who am I FaceTiming? Who am I sending a text to? Who am I writing a letter to stay connected? Here's a really important question. What expectations of normal am I letting go of today, right? There's some things that are a part of our normal every day that those things are out of the window. And we've got to become okay with letting those normal expectations go, because we're in a new normal. And then the last 2 questions are really about getting outside. How am I getting outside? Am I standing on my porch? Am I walking around my cul-de-sac? How am I moving my body? Am I getting exercise each and every day? And then lastly, how am I cultivating beauty? or bringing beauty into my space. That might be, you see my plant back there, that's my beauty in this room. It might be, are you doing any adult coloring? I've been coloring like a mad person over the last several weeks. So what are the things that you're doing? So those are just some tips, Brad, that I would recommend.
That's great, Ericka. Thank you. And Vanessa, I know we spoke about this topic at well briefly, but let's consider what's mostly abnormal. Let's consider it the new normal. And so can you talk about what tactics you might share relative to work-life balance if this becomes a new normal? It seems like it piggybacks a little bit off of Ericka's last point.
Yeah. So first, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm excited to be on this amazing panel. For me, my first hour is mine, and I am very selfish about the first hour of my day. I spend 10 minutes reading. For me, it's faith. So I stay grounded in my faith and what I believe in. The second 10 minutes is prayer. There's a lot going on, a lot of family members that are sick and just friends that have different challenges. So I spend my time doing that. My third 10 minutes of that first 30 minutes is meditation. And I just sit and try to force myself to think about absolutely nothing, which is sometimes a challenge. The next part of my morning is maintaining my workout routine. So my 30-minute workout, I used to work out outside of my home. Now I'm forced to do that in my living room or on my front porch. And then secondly, I block out an hour in the middle of my day. So I spend 30 minutes where I eat alone with no Zoom, no phone. And the next 30 minutes, I go back to feeding my faith for 30 minutes, where that may be a nap or watching something on YouTube that can energize me. The piece I'll end on is why. So my valley was before coronavirus. And as a business owner, every company goes through its ups and its downs. For us, we experienced over 14 months of no revenue. And so imagine having 14 months of no income coming into your household. And so for me, I had to figure out, in the middle of planning a wedding and everything else that was going on in my personal life, I had to figure out what is my normal. And I've just learned that normal is what you create.
That's great. Thank you for that, Vanessa. And I think, Kenya, we've talked briefly with our first two panelists about a little bit of mental health in some capacity. And I think we can all agree that sometimes technology plays a major role in our mental health if we're working from home. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of technology? It's been pushed into the forefront. And can you talk briefly about how some of us professionals have been impacted by maybe new technologies or changes in technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at it really in two ways. I think technology has been a major driver for us in our lives, both from a professional and from a personal perspective for many years now, right? I mean, we have seen, the increase in the amount of social media. We've seen, a variety of different forms of technology that are being used to interact with one another, again, from a professional and from a personal perspective. So in some ways, I feel like we're fortunate, and it's almost like we're being prepared for this moment because we have become accustomed to interacting and engaging in that way. Now we're seeing it at a higher level. But again, it's been so integrated that it's almost prepared us for this virtual environment that we're in. And I think preparation is really the key to having that successful transition to, a more virtual environment in a professional workspace. I think it's important to make sure that you recognize that it is a new norm and that you adjust accordingly. And a big part of that is, understanding the platforms that you're working on, becoming familiar with those platforms, becoming comfortable with that, and understanding as we're leveraging technology more and more to engage with one another virtually, that engagement may be a little bit different than we're accustomed to face. So it may require us to have a little bit more active listening skills. It may require us to recognize different body language cues than we would typically be able to if we were face to face. But I think it's really important to say, that from a technology perspective, I think we've been kind of leading up to this and did not know. It's just a matter of how do you take all of those skills that we've been building over the years and now apply them in a virtual work environment.
Yeah, agreed, Kenya, very much. I think if there's a silver lining, at least we've talked about in my profession, the construction industry as an architect, to some degree, it's a horrible situation to be in the middle of, but I think we're by necessity pushing ourselves maybe 4 or 5 years ahead of where we might have been, technologically speaking, and learning how to communicate better. Can you talk very briefly, and I'll stick with you for a minute, some of the training platforms that might be available and the importance of cybersecurity, which I think has been amplified?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a variety of different free training platforms that are available. So you'll find for most platforms that are being leveraged, whether it is Zoom, whether it's, Microsoft Teams, Slack, whatever those platforms are that you're leveraging, you'll find a lot of free tutorials that are available to you online. If you do just a simple Google search, if you go out to Zoom, for instance, to their website, you can find tutorials, you can find demos. There's a lot of videos that will walk you through how to become familiar with the platforms themselves. So that's my recommendation to most people is if there's a little bit of discomfort or a little bit of intimidation there, to take that time to prepare beforehand and take a look at those videos that are there that will walk you through and get you comfortable with it. So that would be my one, piece of advice and recommendation. I think from a cybersecurity perspective, I think this is something that is really important and very critical for us not to lose sight of. It's almost more important that now that we're mostly working virtually and working from home, we cannot lose sight of those same cybersecurity practices and precautionary measures that we would have been taking while we were physically in the office. We want to make sure that we're still adhering to those same things while we're at home. So we want to make sure that we're careful around, the emails that come in and not just automatically clicking on something that's unfamiliar because we're in a home environment. We actually internally within Vanguard have talked about that with our security teams, that companies may be more subject to, hackers and others trying to infiltrate because they recognize that there's more people that are working in a virtual environment. So it's really around that due diligence and making sure that you're adhering those same standards that you would have been applying while in office, making sure that you're staying with that while you're at home.
That's great. Thank you, Kenya. And I think we'll pivot a little bit because we've talked a lot about working from home to some degree at a personal or individualized level, but I want to talk to Nicole briefly. Nicole, do you want to discuss some of the larger issues that you're dealing with, particularly at the neighborhood and community level? Obviously, your role with the city in Charlotte. This is an unprecedented time for our community. Do you want to discuss briefly some of the issues that you're dealing with?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is an incredible panel to be part of, and it's wonderful to have the opportunity to connect with everyone at our lunch hour. For the city of Charlotte, this really is a whirlwind change. I know that it is for everyone. We as an industry are not typically equipped to work from home. And so even pivoting that model and getting people resourced to be able to be effective at home was kind of a long task for us, thinking about VPN and network access and people who weren't typically taking their computers home and perhaps being a workaholic, as I tend to be, weren't really ready for this. And so we had to pivot as a city. Additionally, we're facing revenue shortfalls, just like most other industries are at this time. And we're pivoting to support our almost 900,000 residents in a very different way while being cognizant of the digital divide that exists. We are thinking about how we communicate, who receives those communications, how we can get those to the masses. And we're also recognizing that our staff in a lot of places are amongst those most vulnerable populations. So it is a lot of change for us at once. Some of the things that the city is doing to cope with that, again, is equipping our staff to work from home. We're looking at measures to protect essential staff that need to be out there, that are collecting your trash and recycles and ensuring that the water stays on, et cetera. The water is a key point. We are reconnecting water services for people who had disconnected service and committing not to connect those. The city is also part of a number of loan programs, the Micro Business Relief Fund, also the COVID-19 Response Fund. We're getting ready to announce a Little Free Pantry grant program for folks that want to put little free pantries on the ground. So like you, we're really kind of learning how to be effective in this new normal and continuing to put our residents first.
Thank you, Nicole. And I want to talk briefly, we talked residents, but I'm certain, given the participants that we have both on the phone and in the webinar, that we have a handful of small business or entrepreneurs on the phone. And so Vanessa, I think for folks that are involved with the largest corporations or the smallest companies, if you wanted to discuss maybe some effective tactics relative to business resiliency, and it's hard to call what we're in the middle of an opportunity, but maybe it is a way to prepare ourselves for future disruption. You want to hit on that briefly, Vanessa?
Yeah. So for us, we define, what is business resilience? For us, the most simplest way I can explain that is it's your ability to absorb the impact and bounce back from disruption. Whether your disruption is a pandemic, a cyber vulnerability, an IT outage, a hurricane, workplace violence, right? Disruption will range depending on the business and how you are structured. I tend to think of things in terms of sports. So, when you throw a basketball bounces back, right? If you throw a flat ball with no air, it will not bounce. It will just sit there. And so we're at this kind of pivotal point, and, with the fork in the road, depending on how this pandemic has impacted you and the organization and your people, which basketball do you want to be? The one with the air that's going to absorb the impact and bounce back, or the one that's flat? And if you're flat now and you need some revitalization, well, you got to get your network involved to help pump some air back into you so you can bounce back. You may hit the rim, you may go out of bounds, but you'll bounce back. And I think that's important, is you have to kind of make a decision on who do I want to actually be. Outside of that, our resilience framework is very simple. We think about it in things of four. So your people, your processes, your technology, and your infrastructure. And if your people are going to do two things. They're going to create your crisis or execute the crisis strategy. Your processes are all about the operation, right? What is your way of how you do it? So Asfalis has a way, the Alliance has a way. What is the way in which you do it? And then also thinking about third-party risks that tie into that. From an infrastructure perspective, those are the things in terms of water, sewer, roads, transportation, energy, the things that we depend on, right? So what's the continuity plan if Duke Energy doesn't deliver the energy, or if the water company doesn't give us water? What's the backup plan, right? And then from a technology perspective, technology supports the processes that run the business. So how do you leverage those tools to maximize time and efficiency? And to Kenya's point, also thinking about the risk of technology, right? Like we can put everything in the cloud and work from home, but there's a risk to that as well. And so from our perspective, we're seeing many people are very focused on what's right now. And I get it, because Mike Tyson has a quote, I'm blanking on the quote, but everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
That's right.
And coronavirus has punched everybody in the mouth. And so what I think is important is for people to also kind of pause and think about your strategy from the next year to 2 years, because we won't be able to really think about a cultural norm until there's a vaccine. And we're a ways away from that, right? And so I think it's important to have the right people at the table. And to me, that's what resilience is all about, bringing the right key stakeholders. There's so many aspects of risk and resilience. It's about having the right people to facilitate those right discussions to help the decision makers to make more informed decisions. So that's what I would I recommend to whether you are a small business or a large enterprise.
That's great, Vanessa. Thank you. And I think I'm gonna segue to Ericka because I saw a lot of head nodding, particularly with the basketball analogy. And I think to some degree that analogy probably applies as much to people personally as it does to businesses professionally. And Ericka, thank you very much, by the way. You're sharing a ton of wonderful information in our group chat. But do you want to talk a little bit about resiliency as it relates to mental health and how people are dealing with the situation, not just professionally, but on a personal level?
Absolutely. As I said before, this is a very unique and different time in our history. Most of us have not encountered anything like this. Even 9/11 was very different. And this is a time when many of us may see that our anxieties have heightened. Maybe our mood feels depressed. I spend most of my days talking about mental health and suicide, and there's a huge amount of stigma out there. And so many people aren't getting help. And what I'm hearing from people now is, oh my gosh, I understand now. I'm starting to feel these feelings, and it's not just in that person's head, right? And so getting people, if they're feeling more anxious, if they're feeling more stressed, if they're feeling depressed, whatever that is, really talking to someone about that is critically important. I think 90% of the people said they're working from home. So what that tells me is they likely have access to an EAP program, which is an employer assistance program. Those programs are free and confidential. They're part of your benefits package. And pre-COVID, organizations like SHRM said only about 13% of folks who are employed and their dependents are using that free benefit. This is a good time to get access to that to help us work through the stresses and anxieties that we're feeling as a result of COVID, as it relates to working from home, as it relates to being at home with your children and your spouse or partner all day. We're working through very, very different circumstances. If you're not used to being home all day and managing your children for the full breadth of their waking and sleeping and homeschooling, if you're not used to navigating with your spouse or partner all day, you might be working through communication issues. This is a really good time to access EAP. Also, I put into the chat, if you are feeling some things that maybe you haven't felt before and you're not quite sure what to do, MHA has online mental health screening tools. There are 11 of them. They look at everything from depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance use. I know we joked the other day, a lot of us are doing virtual happy hours, and that can be fun and a great way to connect, but also looking at what is our intake? Has our intake of alcohol and other substances increased, not just as a way to connect, but is that becoming a coping mechanism for us? So really checking into some of those behaviors is really important during this time.
Thank you, Ericka. That's great insight. And yes, the virtual happy hours are maybe a blessing and a curse at the same time, because I have many of them. Nicole, I think I'll segue briefly to you, because I think everyone on the panel and on the phone would agree that times are very different, because a lot of times we're in a very different place emotionally because of community. And it's a little bit harder to define what that means. So going out to eat, we're in Charlotte, going to a brewery, where it might be. But Nicole, I wondered if you could elaborate briefly on what maybe some neighborhood residents are doing to support one another, obviously while still social distancing, but maybe talk about some success stories or some ways that you think anyone in this group might be able to help enhance what community looks like currently.
Absolutely. I think the key to those virtual happy hours is what time of day they occur. We may want to consider that. So one of the things that we definitely know and practice at the City of Charlotte is that your neighbors are the true first responders. They are the people who are going to get to you the quickest and stay with you the longest in case of emergency. And perhaps many of us are experiencing that now. And so opportunities that we're seeing and that I would offer is to really think about that connection, both from a tactical standpoint. How can I be a support network to my neighbors? If I'm going to go to the grocery store and I know that I have neighbors that are in high-risk categories or have mobility issues or have many children at home that they're trying to manage at one time, can I bring them supplies? Can I bring them dinner? If I'm worried about physical distancing, can I have dinner delivered to them? So just thinking through those components. also allowing yourself to be vulnerable. We all have wonderful tools to offer, but sometimes we need that help too. So thinking of which of your neighbors might be able to provide that support to you, and really using this time to get to know your neighbors. It is not uncommon for people to not know the names of the people on their street. Can you use social tools now? Are there other methods? Is there a phone directory in your neighborhood that you can reach out and just get to know one another so that we are all better prepared to weather this storm? Also, there's a lot to be said for be the joy you want to see in the world. So our support to our neighbors is not only tactical, but we have opportunities to bring joy. We can create signage, virtual hugs. I saw one the other day. Hey, Noda, can't wait to hang out with you again. We can create these chalk walks, things, other activities for kids to do like hopscotch, etc. But just thank you, I love you, I'm glad you're my neighbor, whatever that might be. Another thing that we're seeing are these bear searches or rainbow searches where people are hiding little stuffed toys throughout the neighborhood so that as children are walking with less ability to interact with their friends, that they're finding those things. Certainly absolutely critical to be donating blood if you have that capacity, ensuring that our community supplies are up to stock. This is a strange one, but thinking about how you manage waste. Our waste management crews are essential staff right now. They are practicing social distancing and physical distancing the same way that we are. But what are you doing right now? Those closets. We can't take things to Goodwill and Salvation Army right now. So following communication to understand when you can put things out. On the 27th, there's going to be a pickup of yard waste that was stemming from the storms that we had, but otherwise bulk pickup and storm yard waste are on hold. So don't leave those things at the curb indefinitely. They're going to attract rodents and other things that you don't want to see. Probably tomorrow you'll see a little free pantry grant offered through the city where we're providing up to $150 to either convert a little free library or install a little free pantry to support your neighbors. And lastly, I would just say, listen, I've already heard it shared today, but just being extra diligent in hearing those cues that are letting you know that people need help.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, very much. And you're right. To be honest, until you said that out loud, I haven't even thought about the waste collections process, but I think it's hard for people to understand, and I'm including myself in that category, how far and how wide reaching this pandemic really gets. And sometimes it's hard. You get focused on the microcosm a little bit, but it's a much larger picture. And so on that note, I think maybe just a general question for each of you. And I think, Kenya, we can probably start with you, but are there practices or procedures that we're experiencing or in the middle of currently that we think might continue or change the way we do things post-pandemic because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we are going to see and are in the middle of, again, defining our new norm. And I think when we come on the other side of COVID-19, whatever that timing is, there's going to be lots of lessons learned and best practices that we are going to apply going forward. It's a part of some of our business contingency planning that we've been talking through from a technology standpoint and just more generally is social distancing, right? So what does our future state look like when we return to the office? Is it acceptable for us to be as in close proximity as we would have been before, or do we still need to maintain some aspect of social distancing, right? And there are other, aspects of that are being considered as well. But I think we're going to start to see some changes in behavior just based on the lessons that we've learned from this that will be ongoing. And I think it'll be to our benefit. I think sometimes things like this allow us to learn those lessons and recognize where there's opportunities for us to really reconsider our operating model. And that's what I see happening as we move forward, is a reevaluation of our operating model. I think one other point that I'll make there is the idea that we have a large number of people that are working from home currently who traditionally have not worked from home in the past. And I think what we've found is that in many instances, in groups that have not traditionally worked from home, we're actually seeing increases in the level of productivity, right? And because they're working from home or as a result. So does that mean, again, do we change our work operating model, and transition more to that virtual space? So I just think it's going to, again, open us up to analyze and evaluate some of the changes that were implemented. And I think we'll see some of those applied on a longer term basis.
Yeah, I think very much so. And I agree completely that sometimes situations, whether good or bad of this magnitude, offer perspective, maybe in a different fashion than we're used to looking at things. Vanessa, I wanted to give you a chance to weigh in as well. If there was anything you wanted to add, I know that Kenya's response was a great one. So is there anything you wanted to add to that, Vanessa?
Spot on. One thing I'll piggyback on that we've talked to our clients about is the behavioral economics component. So you can reopen a retail center or a shopping mall, but that doesn't mean that the consumers are coming, right? And so how do we instill consumer confidence, especially when we don't have a vaccine? So what does that look like until we're at a cultural normalization? From our world, at the end of the day, we're still measuring risk. We're still evaluating the impacts of those risks, and we're still helping you to minimize or eliminate the liability and the impacts. How we do that has changed, and Kenya has touched on the how of the execution piece of it.
Yeah, agreed, very much so. And so we have roughly maybe 10 to 12 minutes before I think we're going to open it up to some other questions, but I tend to be a glass half full sort of person or an optimist, just because that's how I have to live my life. But I wanted maybe each of you, if you didn't mind, just highlight a success story that you've seen as a part of this. And that could be from a personal or a professional or a business perspective. But Ericka, maybe I'll start with you. What are some of the feel-good stories that you've seen come out of this?
Sure. And actually, before I answer that, I just wanted to say, in terms of something new, we are seeing unprecedented access around teletherapy. There have been lots of barriers around teletherapy up until the COVID-19. Insurance carriers and legislators have really pulled that back, and that's a great thing. And I hope that on the other side of COVID that we don't go back to what we did before, because this is providing so much more access for folks who are in need of mental health services. In terms of the success stories, I'll point to our media. Our media doesn't always get good attention, but I have taken so many calls from media outlets and reporters and journalists wanting to talk specifically about mental health and emotional well-being as people are living in this age. And I think that's wonderful. That they are taking that vantage point of what's happening and trying to call attention to it. So I think for me, that's the feel good. They're talking to professionals. They're pointing people towards resources. They're talking with people with diagnoses and lived experience. Matter of fact, WSOC, one of the stations I work with most frequently, they're going to have a broadcast later this week specifically about mental health in the age of COVID. So I think that's a huge success story.
That's good. Thank you, Ericka. And Nicole, maybe I'll skip to you next. Do you want to talk about maybe some of the encouraging things that you've seen? I know we talked briefly about it, but maybe at a neighborhood perspective and how residents are stepping up and helping one another.
Yeah, I guess as a student of community, I tend to be a little bit altruistic. And thinking about our work at the city, we design and maintain a lot of public spaces. And there is criticism in the industry that public spaces aren't truly designed for the public, but they're kind of instead designed for the most perfect members of the public, people who have homes to go to, people who are going to follow the rules, etc. And so similarly, basic needs like healthcare and internet accessibility have really also been reserved for those perfect people, for people that have opportunity to access the best jobs. And so one of the things that I'm seeing that's so encouraging is this access to the internet, access to a safety net that can exist to support us when our health is at risk. And I'm really hopeful in thinking that if we can use these things as building blocks, if we can demonstrate that we really can solve these issues, that we can utilize that accessibility to create a system that works for all people instead of one that rewards the perfect people.
Thank you, Nicole. That's a great response. And Kenya and Vanessa, I guess I'll start with Kenya. I wanted to give everybody a chance to tell their feel-good story, or at least some small highlight that they could bring up. Kenya?
Yeah, so I think for me, I'm going to go maybe more from a personal perspective, still related to technology, but I think what the data is telling us and trends that we're starting to see is that we're beginning, even though we are, self-isolating or staying at home, we're starting to see more connections, more engagement, more substantive, conversations and connections. I think we went through a period of time not too long ago where, it's very prevalent to text as opposed to call, to touch point on social media as opposed to having like real conversations. And what the data is beginning to tell us is we're starting to see an increase in the number of phone calls, right, versus text messaging. We're starting to see the increase in those FaceTime video calls. And so it feels like as a society and as a culture, we're kind of going back to, again, that need for connection, and not just through, again, the texting and kind of the short responses, but that willingness and that desire, that need to have conversations and to be able to connect at a deeper level. And that's something that I have experienced personally and seen personally. And again, there's data that backs that up as well. So I think that's a huge, huge, win and success story for us in this situation.
Agreed, very much so. And Vanessa, I wanted to give you a chance to weigh in as well.
Yeah, so I'll share both personally and professionally. I'm a newlywed, myself and my husband. So this has been interesting. We've met families that have divorced in about 30 days because they haven't been home with each other this long. So what came out of it was my husband and I started a brunch and books study on Saturdays where we're going through How to Make Your Marriage a Masterpiece by Montel and Kristen Jordan, and giving young professionals an opportunity to talk about and discuss things from a relationship standpoint, whether you're married or whether you are a couple, to really think about how we can leverage this time to prove the media outlets wrong and how relationships be strengthened because we are spending so much time together and we have an opportunity to talk. So that's been amazing. We've had couples from all over the world that have chimed in. And so we're hosting those on a bi-weekly basis. From a professional perspective, our clients are focused on three things. The first is supply chain resiliency. The second is employee morale. And the third is a framework, a strategy, or a roadmap on what's next and how do they get through the next 2 years of disruption. And so what I've seen that's been really great is the stimulus package has provided the SBA with funding for small businesses to obtain resiliency. Many of our clients in the technology field and financial services, their suppliers don't necessarily have the robust business continuity resiliency efforts that they would like. And so this to me is an opportunity for small businesses to start to take advantage of training and programming, and hopefully to provide some consistency from a supply chain resilience perspective to bring those up to speed. So it looks like people are now investing in the things that I probably cared about for the past 15 years. Everybody else cares now. I always tell my team, like, I'm the only one who cares about crisis management.
Maybe not now. Maybe not this week. No, that's good. Thank you very much. And here in a minute, I think we'll start taking some questions. I was curious, Katie, before we take the questions, if you just wanted to share some of the results from the poll. I'm just curious to see maybe what some of our makeup was. Okay, so almost 90% working from home, 4% of you working on site. Thank you for those of you that are having to do that. Let's roll through these, Katie. I'm just so everyone can get a sense. Okay, great. Broad range. That is not a surprising large anxious right there in the middle of that word cloud. Thank you very much to the 20% of you who were honest in the response to this question that you're not wearing pants.
And those are all the questions.
That's fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for contributing to the poll. I think, one, it gives some gravity to the situation so we can see who's in the audience, but two, it's good to have a joke or two there as well. But I think now we have some questions that have started coming through in the poll, and I'll start to read them. If you would like to add questions to the chat, please do so, and let us know if there's one of the panelists in particular that you'd like to answer the question. But here's one that I think maybe each of you could elaborate on, and maybe we'll start a little bit with Ericka. But one of the questions was, what are some of the tips for maintaining work-life balance when the lines are probably even more so blurred now than they usually are? And Ericka, we talked about this yesterday. I think for a lot of people, the office is now 8 feet away, not 8 miles away. So you want to elaborate briefly?
Sure. Now more than ever is a great time to establish boundaries, routines, right? So creating a schedule for yourself, creating a workspace. My workspace is upstairs. I actually post my schedule on the door, so my husband and my daughter kind of know when I'm unavailable. Making sure you're getting enough sleep, making sure you're hydrating yourself. Again, back to the sunlight. I can't say just how much getting out in the sunlight to produce that vitamin D that's so good for our brain. This may sound sacrilegious, but turn your phone off, turn your computer off for at least an hour a day so that you can physically go through the act of disconnecting. My daughter, who's 21, said the other day, she actually goes through the process of closing all of the URLs and programs that she has open on her phone to signal to herself and to her brain that I'm ending my day. And I've actually started doing that myself because I usually have 47,000 links open at a time. So just the process of saying, I'm winding down for today. Just those things that create boundaries and rituals for us are incredibly important. Taking a smile break and getting some laughter. Who are your favorite comedians? So you have an opportunity to laugh. I mean, like belly laugh every day. And then practicing breathing, not just breathing up here, but really getting down into your diaphragm where you're getting that deep restorative breath is really important.
Yeah, thank you, Ericka. What was it you told me the other day about the shoulder comment?
Yeah, I talked about scanning your body to see if you're tense and kind of what you're holding. Oftentimes we have our shoulders up here. We don't know it. I told Brad, you have to take your shoulder earrings off. So
yeah,
bring your shoulders from up here to down, check your posture, and just see, is there a place in your body where you're holding tension that you really don't realize, and begin to let that go.
Yeah, and I saw that Vanessa just added, she said virtual yoga has been great. And for what it's worth, I can also say that my wife is also a newfound virtual yogi for the last week and a half. Yeah. Another question that was just sent through, and I think this is probably, maybe Vanessa and Nicole can both weigh in on this, but where do you see the biggest risks long-term relative to both business and education? And what do you think maybe folks in this group can do to help those who are at risk in terms of coping or transitional times?
Yeah, so I can probably answer the first part of it. Going back to our model, people, processes, infrastructure, and technology, I think the number one risk is still people. I have been on calls with small businesses, medium businesses, large and governments, and still, we have a pandemic crisis and then we have an economic crisis. And I get it, we want to get back to work and open the economy so people can have money and they can work because that's the society that we live in. But people are not making decisions about people. And I think that's the number one problem and the risk that will continue. The second, I would say, are in terms of most important out of the four is technology. I think that some have a barrier to technology. Not everybody has the same access. What's normal to Ericka is not normal to Vanessa. right? And we all have a bit of privilege, in my opinion. And so going back to the people, not every person has access to the right technology. And then also many organizations are still very unaware of the vulnerabilities that exist from a technology perspective, as well as how to leverage technology to work smarter, but also technology shouldn't weigh you down. It should help to empower and accelerate, but sometimes the way in which we implement it can go in a negative direction. So I would say people and technology are the first two. How we help people from a mental perspective, I'll leave that for my panelists.
That's Ericka's wheelhouse. Well, and I think we've touched on that briefly, but one of the other things that I wanted to ask, and Nicole, I think maybe this is for you, is obviously we've seen massive changes in education. And can you hint maybe just briefly, and please let me know if you don't want to go through the whole process, but talk about maybe some of the things that the city has been doing to help out in terms of CMS. Schools are obviously changing. I'll say one of the overwhelmingly consistent responses that I've heard through this pandemic is that teachers are underpaid now that everyone is having to teach their own children. And so do you want to weigh in briefly, Nicole, on maybe some of the educational components that we're dealing with in our region?
I can hit that slightly. I hate to be the person to say the city doesn't do schools, but the city doesn't do schools. That said, we definitely have a very integral role in that partnership. So to your previous question about kind of what are the large risk areas, for me, one is housing stability. When we tell people stay safe, be home, what does that mean if you don't have a home? Those partnerships that we're all party to in trying to address housing issues. The second one that came to mind is food security. And one of the things that parallels so directly with CMS, and one of the very first kind of pain points in thinking about school being out, was that a lot of children depend on the school system for meals. And so one of the very first communications that the city released was where to go get free lunch and free breakfast because your children don't have that access at school. So that is one of the things that is very tied, and then also tied to education would be the third item for me, which is really internet accessibility. And that's not just this wonderful benefit that Spectrum is providing for free access for a limited amount of time, but that is having the hardware, and that is having the education to know how to utilize those resources. Without that, you're not going to find jobs, you're not going to learn about these resources as quickly. You're really kind of cut off if you don't have that component figured out.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicole. And one of the things that I think I can ask the whole group, but we're closing in on, I think maybe that was the last question or two that we've seen, but I'm just curious. We have an incredibly robust, engaged young professional community in our region, and I think that's clearly representative by, I think we had 180 people sign up for this webinar. And so if each of you could talk, and again, it can be personally or professionally, about what this group in particular can do to help, and this could be in whatever arena, but I obviously think that this group wants to be engaged, and we're all significantly tied to trying to make our region a better place. And so Ericka, maybe I'll start with you, but you want to talk briefly through maybe how a young professional demographic can be engaged and help out in a time of need?
Because my work focuses around mental health advocacy and education, I would say spend some time while we're working from home learning what does it look like if someone is symptomatic or if someone's in crisis. Mental Health America does a lot of education, mental health education. Right now, we are teaching suicide prevention, QPR suicide prevention classes every Thursday. They're free and online. And you might say, well, why do I need that? That seems very morbid. But as I said before, people's anxieties and emotional stability is changing each and every day. We're actually going into the season where we see the most death by suicide. A lot of times people think death by suicides occur the most at the holidays and during the winter, but actually we see the greatest death by suicide late spring and early summer. So the more people we can get to recognize when someone might be having suicidal thoughts and knowing what they can do as an individual community person to intervene and what the resources are, we can save lives. People don't know that we lose about 47,000 people in our country every year to suicide, and we all have a role to play. And so taking a simple class like QPR can go a long way.
That's great. Kenya, it's been a while since we've heard from you. We'll get your perspective on the matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a few things that we can do, you know, as a young professional organization to support the community during this time. I think the thing that sticks out to me the most is the conversation we were just having around, you know, many of us are in a privileged situation to be able to work remotely, to be able to maintain our jobs and to continue to move forward, albeit in a different way. I think, you know, taking that opportunity to help others, to help the community, to donate, to make sure that we're focusing on those communities that are food insecure or maybe who have lost their jobs. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to give back and to help in that particular way. I think the other thing that I think about that is very specific from a technology perspective is, again, help your community, right? Help your neighbors, help others who may not be as technology savvy, right, as others. If you've got that skill set and that ability to, you know, help the community, help your neighbors, help your family, friends, kids, so that they can be successful, right, and kind of learn, you know, in this new environment that we're in, leverage that skill set and that gift to others.
Agreed, very much so, and that's a great point. Kenya. Nicole, do you want to weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, I think Kenya's right on. It's really important to remember that we're in this together, but we are not experiencing this equally. So use the time to gain awareness, look and listen, use this kind of rawness and anxiety that we alluded to push yourself to personal growth. Get uncomfortable, find books that provide awareness that you maybe didn't have. Think about the context of community and the people that you don't know and how you can get more familiar with them in this time. And then use that knowledge really to become an advocate for the needs that aren't currently being addressed. And certainly, please vote. Vote for the people who are advocating for you and for others to ensure that when we are in this space and others like it, that we can be resilient and supported.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And Vanessa, is there anything that you wanted to add on top of that?
Yeah, so from a personal perspective, even the airlines tell us to put on your mask first. And so going back to the words from everybody, you know, I saw stressed, pregnant, hopeful, purposeful, frustrated. Put on your mask first. From a professional perspective, I'm big on the principles of crisis leadership. From an Asfalis standpoint, that is trust, communication, influence, and hope. And hope is looking at the future. And I believe that new leaders will emerge. I also believe that leadership is not about titles. And so I would just strongly recommend young professionals to, you know, think about how am I emerging through this crisis as a leader.
That's great. And I think if I can just maybe wrap things up in a bow, and I warned everybody earlier that I was eternally optimistic, but one of the things about a time like this that really makes me excited about, one, where we live, but two, the human condition is, in times of crisis, I find that resiliency really comes to the forefront and you really figure out that people do care about one another. And so I just want to advocate that the Young Professionals group with the Business Alliance is also a resource. So if anyone wants to be more involved or needs to be connected in the community, I still, even though we're not getting that beer at 5 o'clock like we normally do for our mixers and our lunches, we're still here. And there are a handful of folks that are on this call that are on the board that are more than willing to have conversations with you about involvement in the board or just as a young professional to touch base with, because I know that I think the thing I've seen is we're not necessarily all on the same boat, but we are all in the same ocean right now. And it's important for us to help one another out. And so I think now's a good time for me, one, to thank all of you. Absolutely wonderful panel conversation. And before I close it up, I think I'm going to go to Charisse. I think you wanted to add a comment or two.
I did. Yes, thanks. I echo your comments, thanking the panel for participating. And Brad, thank you for leading the conversation.